G'day, I'm Dave with Chaosium. In this interview, James sat down with Lynne Hardy to discuss her writing process. If you enjoyed this content, let us know in the comments and subscribe to see more.
Oh, it's always tricky when people ask you for that because everybody's got their own way of working, and what's right for one person isn't right for someone else. So, by all means, if you are thinking of going off and starting to write scenarios, look at people's advice, but don't stick to it slavishly. Find what works for you. And it can be a bit of a process of elimination, but don't let that put you off. So that's the first piece of advice is not all advice is good advice and it might not work for you. Um, I mean, when I'm writing, I usually have a bit of an idea about something, but I'll usually have more of an idea about where I want to set it and when I want to set it. So then I'll go and I'll do my research about that location, that historical period. Quite often start with guidebooks. I mean, you can't really see them. You can just see there's a couple of guidebooks on the shelf there behind me. So I tend to get the one from the year before that's being sold off because it's all out of date, so it's a bit cheaper. But it usually still has some interesting snippets of local culture, local history, local folklore that quite often will just spark something or will help add something. And I think we've talked about this before is that when you're doing research, quite often you will stumble across something that's way weirder than any idea you've had that doesn't take an awful lot of tweaking to make it into a really interesting Call of Cthulhu scenario. So, yeah, if you've got an idea, that's fantastic, but don't sort of shut off listening to what your research is telling you because that might be able to give you something really interesting as well. And once I've done my research and I've got my notes, I'll sit and have a bit of a think about what it is I want to do and I'll write notes about what I want to do and then slowly it will come together and then I'll start writing it and I'll just sort of flip backwards and forwards through the scenario in the document, sort of filling in bits as I go, and then hopefully at the end of it, I end up with something coherent that's actually, playable.
Is there a piece of common writing advice or common writing law that a lot of people do, which you find yourself completely disregarding? Is there something that most people do that you don't?
I honestly don't know. I tend to be reasonably oblivious, to be fair. So, long ago I found what worked for me, and that's kind of what I've stuck with because it seems to be going okay.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you've definitely got a backlog of good content, which proves it does. Do you write to music?
Sometimes, sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. I can't really have anything with lyrics on because I'm a terror for singing away with things, particularly in the car. I dread to think what anybody driving past me thinks I'm up to, yodeling away. So when I'm writing, it has to be orchestral, quite often game or film soundtracks. I have a huge catalogue of weird, esoteric electronica and things that have been recommended by friends that you can just have on in the background as effectively white noise, really, just as something to take the edge off the silence. But at other times, I can't have anything on at all. It just depends on where I am in the scenario and how complex it is and how much concentration I have to be able to give to that particular bit. Same for editing.
Do you find that you get in a different zone for editing than you do for writing, or is it sort of a similar sort of flow state?
It can be similar at times. Certainly when I'm editing, I like to do multiple passes because you never hit everything on the first pass. So my first pass is usually becoming familiar with material, checking the spelling and grammar, noticing big things that are wrong. My second pass will usually be a lot more analytical because my brain has had time to sort of subconsciously mull over everything that it's read and can start to put together where things aren't quite working. So I'll spot more sort of like where the joins are, if you like, or they're things that need just fixing and sorting out and smoothing on the second pass. And then the third pass is just to make sure that I haven't actually introduced any errors. Sometimes you get to do three passes, which is great. Sometimes you only get to do the two. But that's what proofreaders are for, is to make sure that they spot anything you've introduced while inadvertently attempting to make things better.
Do you read your own work when you're finished with it? As in, well, once it's published and out there and you can't
Once it's
change it
published,
anymore?
no, I don't tend to actually. Because it's really weird to do. It's like you asked me before we started recording this, had I seen any of the videos that we did last time? It's like, no, because I find it really, really weird watching myself doing this sort of thing. I can just about cope with listening to myself on a podcast if I have to. But I also find reading my own stuff very, very strange, particularly as there's usually quite a distance between you submitting it and it being published, because it always almost feels like somebody else wrote it.
Mm, mm,
It's
I
a very
understand.
strange experience.